Witness, if you will, a man by the name of Rod Serling, a most unusual gentleman with a very powerful gift for bending the laws of reality. A man who, with the swipe of his pen, was able to create worlds that defied comprehension and stories that took us beyond the realms of what we believed possible. A man who took us to a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of the mind. A dimension where we explored the mysteries of both distant worlds as well as those at home. A place where the supernatural meets the mundane and the impossible becomes commonplace. A shadowy realm where nothing is as it seems, and where we now travel to explore the top 6 stories from a destination known as the Twilight Zone. If you're an adult who spent any time in a house with a television between the years of 1954 and the current year of 2020, there's an excellent chance that you've watched an episode or two or 102 of a little television program known as the Twilight Zone. At the time of its first release, it was a revolutionary new program the likes of which had never been seen before, and one that frankly to this day, 66 years later, is without peer. Very simple concept, really. In its original format, the show consisted of an opening and closing narration bookending a single half-hour story. That was usually otherworldly, supernatural, or otherwise unusual in nature. For a lot of people, myself included, the Twilight Zone represents their very first exposure to anything that could be considered even remotely horror-themed. As far as I can tell, the original program has no discretionary rating, and the stories are for the most part non-violent. There are very few jump scares. I've never even seen so much as a drop of blood in the entire series. But don't let that fool you. This harmless-looking black and white television program from a distant time absolutely has the ability to disturb, unnerve, and keep you awake at night with its unique brand of science fiction / soft horror that serves as a gateway drug of sorts for the more supernaturally inclined. Twilight Zone was also, as far as I can tell, the godfather and perfecter of the twist ending that would go on to be emulated and copied by everyone from Christopher Nolan to David Fincher to M. Night Shyamalan. This was a show of immense historic significance and boundless influence in both the science fiction and horror communities. Its unparalleled influence is far-reaching and has in one way or another touched almost every single person who has any affinity for the genres. It served as a precursor to shows like Night Gallery, The Outer Limits, The X-Files, Tales from the Crypt, and Tales from the Dark Side, as well as spawning 2 reboots and an ill-fated movie. But tonight, we're going to be talking about the OGTZ. Full disclosure, I am not a Twilight Zone historian by any means. I don't even think I've seen all the episodes. I tried to go out of my way to not look at many best of lists before putting this episode together, and I have only a vague passing knowledge of what episodes might typically appear on any such list. The 6 I'm going to discuss here are simply the episodes that spoke to me. They captured my imagination and haunted my dreams. Without further ado, number 6, Night Call. The most primal and arcane of man's fears, death, the great equalizer. That is the primary theme explored in this installment, with a secondary theme of regret. One of the darker selections on this list. This episode revolves around an elderly woman who begins receiving frightening anonymous phone calls late at night. On the other end of the line is usually either silence or indecipherable moaning. The woman is so upset by the calls that she phones the operator to trace the calls. Back in the old days, it took a long time to trace calls, so several more days pass and several more phone calls before she finally receives a return call from the operator. She states that the phone call was impossible because it's coming from a downed line at the edge of town. Elva gets her caretaker to drive her to the location of the downed power line and gasps when she realizes the power line is in a cemetery and the line goes directly into the ground where her long-dead fiancé rests. She returns home and waits anxiously for her nightly call this time, holding the phone in bed with her. The call indeed does come, and this time her ghostly fiancé speaks, but to remind her that she told him to leave her alone last time, so this will be the final call. This is one of the more horror-ish episodes on the list, fairly straightforward and simple episode, but remarkably effective. It always left me with an eerie feeling that I struggled to shake off. 7.5 out of 10. Number 5, The After Hours. A strange story about a woman who discovers the shocking truth about her reality after a series of strange encounters with staff at a downtown retail store while shopping for a gold thimble on her mother's birthday. While searching for the thimble, she is directed to a 9th floor that doesn't actually exist. Upon arriving at this 9th floor, Marcia discovers a darkened, empty warehouse of a floor with scattered boxes and empty display cases. She is startled by a rather strange sales associate who asks her what she's looking for, and then shows her the lone piece of merchandise available on the 9th floor, a single gold thimble. Several of the scenes in this episode boast an extremely surreal, dreamlike quality. The way reality just bends into something completely unnatural is very unnerving, and while the episode doesn't veer all the way into horror territory, it is disturbing beyond a doubt. And the mannequins, my God, what more do I need to say about these nightmarish figures? Some people hate spiders, some people hate clowns. For my money, mannequins are the worst of all. Just look at them. Those lifeless eyes, it's like they're mocking you. This is an episode that gives me the chills just thinking about it. The cinematography in the scenes on the 9th floor, the odd mannerisms of the other characters that Marcia interacts with, it all feels like a strange dream from a long time ago. Without a doubt, one of the strongest episodes I've ever seen, and could have been even better, perhaps with a darker final act. 8 out of 10. Number 4, Miniature. Starring the legendary Robert Duvall, this is the lone episode appearing in this list from Season 4. Season 4 had the distinction of being the only season of the original run that features hour-long episodes. All the others were 30 minutes, and you can feel the difference in this episode. It is a deeper, more fleshed out, more emotional story. This is the story of a social misfit named Charlie, who is accurately described by his boss as a square peg in a round hole moments before firing him. Charlie struggles with interpersonal relationships and still lives with his loving but overbearing mother into his middle age. He is not a bad person by any means, just someone who can't seem to find his way in the world. One day while browsing at a local museum, he takes particular interest in a dollhouse whose residents come to life when he peers into their reality. A story of love and tragedy unfolds before him, and when he's forced to eventually leave the museum, all he can think about is the girl in the dollhouse and when he can see her again. Now fired from his job for his oddball behavior, Charlie's mother and sister try to set him up on a blind date with disastrous results. His increasingly erratic and alarming behavior eventually leads to him being institutionalized, but he is released back into his mother's care after a time by pretending to be rehabilitated. He immediately escapes the house and returns to the museum, but when his friends and family think they have him tracked down, none of them can find him except for the museum guard, who keeps the impossibility that he sees to himself. This is a story about obsession and mental illness. This is what happens when you withdraw from reality and your world shrinks to a point where there is nowhere left to hide. I've always found this episode to be extremely haunting. The acting from everyone, especially Duvall, is top-notch. The story is beautifully executed. Top shelf. This is a solid 8.5 out of 10. Number 3, A Game of Pool. Heavy lies the crown is the moral of this story, another of obsession, though a slightly different nature. Fantastic casting once again here with the late great Jonathan Winters and Jack Klugman making up the entirety of the cast. The episode revolves around a man who spent his entire life fighting to be the best in the world at something, and he has found that something in the game of pool. He's a master player who's defeated everyone he has ever faced, but he cannot escape the long shadow of the 15 years deceased great Fats Brown. When the apparition of Fats shows up to grant Jesse Cardiff this lone opportunity to defeat the spectral great, a tense marathon of razor-close finishes ensues. Fats suggests that Jesse has regrettably wasted his life in his single-minded pursuit of being the greatest pool player ever. In the final match, Fats uncharacteristically misses a layup shot to seal the win, and after receiving a final warning from Fats about the cost of greatness, Jesse capitalizes and sinks his shot, finally cementing his legacy as the greatest pool player ever. Years later, a now long-dead Jesse is shown having to answer another in an endless list of challenges in the afterlife. A simple but solid story with a very strong message. The biggest highlight of this is the fantastic portrayal of the two characters by Winters and Klugman. One of the all-timers, 8.5 out of 10. Number 2, Icing the Body Electric. Coming in at number 2 is a surprisingly gentle and uplifting, albeit strange tale about coping with grief. Written by the great Ray Bradbury, this is a bit of a polarizing episode, but I absolutely love it. First of all, the title, taken from a poem by Walt Whitman, is beautiful. I don't know exactly what it means, but it is a stunning title. Mr. Rogers, a widowed father of 3, is struggling to juggle work and being there for his grieving children when they stumble across an advertisement from a company that manufactures robotic grandmothers. The family heads to the showroom and are given a tour where they can select the various body parts and even the voice that will be put into her. I love the high contrast cinematography of this scene. It reminds me a bit of the old school Disneyland dark ride, the way that everything is pitch black except for the exact area that's being displayed. The two younger children, Tom and Karen, are excited by the new addition to the family, but the eldest daughter, Anne, is resentful and refuses to acquiesce. She is still clearly the most heartbroken over the loss of their mother. During a fit, Anne runs from the electric grandma into the street and is nearly struck by a speeding van, but Grandma is able to shove her out of the way and take the hit. The children and Mr. Rogers look on with concern, but after a brief scare, Grandma gets up and dusts herself off. From there it is shown that Grandmother goes on to be completely accepted by the family and plays an enormous role in enriching the children's lives, all the way to young adulthood. As the children get ready to leave for college, Grandma is headed back to the factory to be repurposed for another family or recycled. This episode grows on me with every viewing, and I can't exactly say why, but there is a whimsical and poetic quality to it, and there's something refreshing about how compassionate the episode is in its portrayal of the characters, while at the same time retaining that classic Twilight Zone feel. The theme of grief feels like it may have been very intimate and very personal to Ray Bradbury, or possibly the director of this episode. One of my very favorites, 9 out of 10. And before we get to our number 1, some honorable mentions. The Lonely. A man is imprisoned on a desolate moon with only a female robotic companion to keep him from going completely insane. The Long Morrow. An astronaut falls in love with a woman just before launch of a 30-year space mission, but when he returns, he is in for a surprise. The Masks. A wealthy patriarch on his deathbed has a surprise for his vulture-like relatives. Eye of the Beholder. A classic episode about the power of perception and beauty. A horribly disfigured woman awaits the outcome of her cosmetic surgery. And that brings us to number 1, The Obsolete Man. Another phenomenal casting job. The incomparable Burgess Meredith stars as Romney Wordsworth, a librarian from a dystopian fascist future where all books, religion, and music, among other things, have been outlawed. Mr. Wordsworth is on trial for the crime of being obsolete, a crime that carries with it the penalty of death. Refusing to apologize for or lie about his profession, Romney is quickly sentenced to death, but his moxie seems to both amuse and intrigue the surveying chancellor. Romney is granted his chosen method of execution and chooses to be assassinated in his own apartment on live television. Despite its irregular nature, the request is granted. Early in the broadcast of Romney's final hour, the chancellor arrives at his request to speak with him. The Chancellor arrogantly reinforces his assertion that the state is all-powerful, and obsolete people such as Mr. Wordsworth have no value other than the entertainment that their groveling should provide. Wordsworth informs the Chancellor that he has a card up his sleeve, however. The method of execution he has chosen is a bomb, and he has locked the Chancellor in the room with him to reconsider his imperious attitudes towards human life. As the minutes tick by, Romney calmly reads passages from his illegal Bible that he had hidden away for years, and the Chancellor grows increasingly unable to hide his terror. Finally, with seconds left, the Chancellor breaks down and begs to be set free, which Romney obliges, and then stays in the room to be disintegrated alone. Upon returning to his post, the Chancellor learns that he has been replaced due to his cowardice and is now himself condemned to death. He pleads for his life and tries to get away, but is engulfed by the fascist horde. I've probably seen this episode 10 times or more, and I never get tired of it. Casting, acting, cinematography, and score are all top-notch. The writing is superb. The story is just as, if not more relevant today than ever. And this, to me, represents the quintessential Twilight Zone episode, checking all the boxes, including the classic twist ending, perfectly executed. My personal favorite episode, 10 out of 10 for me. So that's going to wrap it up for my top 6 Twilight Zone episodes. One of the greatest television programs of all time. And Rod Serling, one of the most influential and inspirational icons of all time in the world of horror and science fiction. So we'll see you again on Big Chill Theater Presents. And until next time...